Autopsy doctors of Reddit, what was the biggest revelation you had to a person's death after you carried out the procedure? Worked at an animal hospital. They did necropsies for zoos all the time. An alligator died, and they shipped it to the hospital, refrigerated etc. to stop the decay. They took it out and put it up on the table. After doing all the paperwork, they started opening up the alligator. After the first cut, the alligator opened its eyes. Turns out it wasn't dead. The zoo vet mistook an illness for death and the low temperature put it basically into a coma. Edit. Unfortunately, this is all the information I know on this story. It's been 7 years since I worked at that place. I worked at a coroner's office for a while and once we had a guy who we thought had died from an odd on meth. Well, we started the autopsy and I went to cut his lungs out and blueberry muffin mix started coming out of them. I stuck my finger in his mouth and it was full of blueberry muffin mix. And it was in throat. Turns out he got just high enough to pass out while eating the muffin mix and he ended up choking to death. I did the autopsy of both the robber and his victim. The robber shot the victim in the back when he tried to escape in a motorcycle, and the robber was shot by the police in the exact same situation. What's interesting is that they both died by exactly the same lesion. Both of them had their fourth lumbar vertebra shattered and their aorta, main artery of the body, sectioned at the same level. I thought of it like an extreme example of instant karma. During my internship rotation a couple of years back, a 40-year-old guy came in because he suddenly collapsed while drinking with friends. He came in unresponsive, mouth bleeding, and not breathing, so we had to intubate him. For some reason, the endotracheal tube, the stiff tube placed inside the trachea to help the patient breathe, won't go in, but we managed to suction copious amounts of blood clots. After CPR, still with unsuccessful intubation so we had to bag him with a face mask, the patient was declared dead, and diagnosed with a ruptured abdominal aortic aneurysm. During the autopsy, they found out that the guy was apparently shot by a gun from the top of the head, the entry wound was obscured by his hair, and was barely bleeding at all, and the bullet somehow went through the back of the guy's throat and made a hole behind the base of the tongue, which the endotracheal tube kept slipping into. Not a doctor, but a whole-body scientific donation technician. I'm the person who dissects cadavers after they were donated. We very commonly would get young cases, normally overdoses. Had a mid-30s female, went to medical examiner prior to donation, but they only did an external evaluation. I went to check her genitals to see if I could palpate a uterus, found a condom full of pills. Similar to most, the body became a crime scene and we couldn't touch her. When we finally were able to continue, they asked us to photograph the pills to send to the examiner's office. They were mostly Advil and Zyrtec, easily one of the weirdest things I've ever found. Med student almost graduated here. A couple years ago I attended the pathological anatomy course and during a class the professor showed us some autopsies. Despite the tremendous smell of 4/5 consecutive autopsies, one of them was carried out on a homeless patient that died in the ER probably due to heart failure. The body had massive ascites, flow in the abdomen, so at first he had to evacuate it. Imagine him cutting the abdomen and the yellow rancid liquid started to come out like a fountain. One of my colleagues fainted. Then the next step was to examine the abdominal organs. Imagine the face of every person in the room when it became clear that the patient had some form of inherited polycystic disease and the liver and the kidneys were full of cysts. The liver weighed more than 10 kilograms, normal weight 2 to 3 kilograms, and the kidneys almost 3 kilograms each, normally 150 grams each. The professor was really shocked at the beginning, but then he really enjoyed cutting through the cysts in order to get samples. They popped like hairballs spreading liquid all over the place. Okay. Here's another story that will always stick out. The entire residence was absolutely tossed, as if someone was looking for something. However, this wouldn't end up being a typical robbery turned homicide. This was about to be way more bizarre. We get the man into the bag so crime scene can take their photos. In the nearby toilet, we discover even more blood. Possibly up to at least a third of this gentleman's entire volume of blood in the john. It was just around that exact moment where another patrol officer was perusing around the residence when he started to find random objects covered in fecal matter. Eventually, he found more objects with a mix of fecal matter and blood. It then hit us just exactly what we were dealing with, extreme violent sodomy with foreign objects. Most of the objects were reasonable, I suppose, smaller objects resembling the phallic shape, TV remotes, things of that like. Well, 3 of the objects stuck out that were discovered are what make this story. The first was a broom. Sure, you think, kinda skinny, right? Can't be that bad. Well, it was the depth up the grip of it that we were concerned about. This man definitely had his bowel perforated by how deep this thing went. The second object of note was a baseball bat, the contact end of it. Again, pretty deep, but significantly wider in girth. The final and most standout of the objects was a guitar. A really nice Stratocaster too. The tuning end of the guitar. The tuning knobs were all covered in a thick paste of fecal matter and blood. This man had been sodomized to death. At autopsy, the findings were obvious. However, what I had to do was something I'll never forget. After the primary evisceration was complete, the doctor wanted to completely excise the rectum. So I had to don a chainmail glove and, after rolling this poor guy onto his side, press inside his abdominal cavity to press his rectum out towards his anus till the doctor could pull it taut enough to cut out. After she had his guy's rectum out, which resembled one of those jelly-filled toys that when you hold them they kinda fall inside themselves and through your hands, my 80s/90s baby friends should recall these guys. We then cut lengthwise up it to unfold the rectal tissue into a large rectangle to see the extent of the internal lacerations. Needless to say, deep, extensive, and numerous. The assailants have been apprehended. So that's the story about how I had to cut out a guy's butthole, for science, medicine, and law. This story circulates every year at my medical school. A body came in with a gunshot wound to the chest. There was no exit wound. They tried to locate the bullet during the autopsy. No success. They then did a whole scan, X-ray or CT, of the upper chest/abdomen/pelvis. No bullet. At that point someone said fuck it, let's scan the whole body. Lo and behold, the bullet was detected in the popliteal fossa, area behind the knee. It had embolized/traveled from the heart all the way down the arterial system to the knee where it got stuck in one of the narrowed blood vessels. And then BertFan asks the most important question in the comments. How the fuck does a bullet even fit inside a blood vessel? Masters in forensic pathology here. You'd be surprised to know the number of people that have life-threatening issues that never went diagnosed and that they didn't die from. Seen an older guy who died of pneumonia in hospital. On autopsy the guy had both an enlarged heart and a couple of medium-sized aneurysms in the brain. Another guy in his 70s apparently came into the ER and had chest pain and died shortly after. Dies of a heart attack but also had cancer. In less natural circumstances though, saw a guy who had been shot in the head a couple of times. 3 definite entries and a blown-out skull, but police only found one bullet. Couldn't find the other bullet in his head at all. Assumed the police missed it. Went on as normal with the autopsy until we got to the chest cavity. The other bullet was just chilling beside his lung. Turns out it entered the skull, hit the inside, ricocheted down his neck and into the chest. That was pretty wild. Thank you for watching, and if you liked the video then smash that like button. Please as well consider subscribing.